Under GST, supply generally requires consideration, that is a payment. Schedule 1 creates an exception. Schedule 1 of the CGST Act lists specific activities that are treated as a supply even if it is made without consideration. We have already discussed regarding Para 1 and Para 2 of Schedule 1 in the earlier videos relating to permanent transfer and disposal of business assets and supplies between related and distinct persons. Today we are discussing Para 3 of Schedule 1. In simple terms, it states that supply of goods by a principal to an agent or vice versa is a taxable supply even if no payment is exchanged, provided the agent undertakes to supply or receive these goods on behalf of the principal. Now let's understand what is Para 3 of Schedule 1. It basically talks about supply of goods between principal and agent that will be subject to GST even if it is made without consideration. Remember, this provision applies only to goods. For services, principal-agent relationships are dealt with differently under other provisions. Now first let's understand who is a principal and who is an agent under GST. Who is the principal? Principal is basically the owner of the goods. In GST law, the principal is the person on whose behalf the agent acts. For example, a shoe manufacturer in Mumbai sends 1,000 pairs of shoes to his Delhi-based agent. So here, the shoe manufacturer is basically the principal. Who is an agent under GST? An agent is broadly a person who supplies and receives goods on behalf of another, like a broker or a commission agent or an auctioneer. But under GST, agent is basically a person who, without buying, sells someone else's goods in its own name to the customers. This is important to understand. Under GST, agent is basically a person who is, without buying those goods, sell someone else's goods in its own name to the customers. So, if a person is determined as an agent under GST, then a supply between a principal and an agent, even if it is without consideration, will be a supply and GST will be levied. Otherwise, such person will be treated only as a facilitator and will be treated as a supply only when there is a consideration between agent and a principal. Now let's read the provisions. Para 3 essentially says supply of goods A by a principal to his agent, where the agent undertakes to supply such goods on behalf of the principal. So basically it talks about selling agent here. Agent that sells goods on principal's behalf. So if the principal supplies a good to agent without consideration and the agent sells the goods to the customer in its own name, then the supply between the principal and the agent is a supply and GST will apply even if it is made without consideration. However, if in this transaction, if the agent was selling the goods to customer in principal's name and not in its own name, that is, in the invoice, the name of the seller will be the principal's name, then the transfer of goods between principal and agent without consideration will not be deemed a supply and no GST shall apply. Here, agent is merely a facilitator. And let's read another provision B. Supply of goods by an agent to his principal, where the agent undertakes to receive such goods on behalf of the principal. Now it talks about the buying agent here. Agent receives goods for principal. The agent must receive the goods and not just arrange delivery here. The receipt must be on behalf of the principal. That is, the agent takes physical constructive possession before passing it to the principal. So Para 3B was specifically provided here to capture reverse scenarios like a procurement agent who buys raw material locally for an overseas principal. Now let's dive deeper into when will a person be an agent in terms of Para 3 of Schedule 1. The deciding factor is basically the authority to pass the title of the goods. Does the agent have the authority to pass the title of the goods in his own name? If the agent issues the invoice for further supply in his own name, then the movement of goods from the principal to the agent will fall under Para 3 of Schedule 1. Example, the Delhi-based person, or basically the agent, who receives the shoes from the manufacturer and sells them to local retailers, if he issues his own invoice, then it is the agent under GST. Therefore, any supply from principal, manufacturer is the principal here, to his agent, that is the Delhi-based agent, even if without consideration it happened, will be treated as a deemed supply and GST will be charged. Let's understand the purpose of having this clause in treating supplies between principal and agent without consideration as deemed supplies. Why did the government do this? The primary intention is to prevent revenue leakage and ensure a seamless flow of input tax credit. As discussed in the previous video on stock transfer between distinct persons, here in a principal agent as well, just transferring goods without charging each other will block input tax credit flow if it is not treated as a supply under GST. Let's suppose the principal is in Delhi and the agent is in Haryana, and the principal sends goods to the agent in Haryana without consideration, and let's suppose it is not a supply and so no GST was charged. In this case, the input tax credit on the raw materials that was purchased by the principal to make that goods at Delhi location will be blocked, while tax paid on final sale at Haryana location by the agent will have no input tax credit available to be reduced from the output tax. Now let's take some examples based on this para. 1. Agent sells in his own name and issues own invoice the goods of the principal. Is para 3 triggered? Yes. GST is payable on a supply between principal to agent? Yes, it's a deemed supply. Agent sells in principal's name. Will para 3 be triggered? No, because it's a regular sale. Then another scenario. Anmol appoints Bholu to procure certain goods from the market. Bholu identifies various suppliers who can provide the goods as desired by Anmol and asks the supplier Golu to send the goods and issue the invoice directly to Anmol. So, Anmol is a person who has appointed Bholu to procure certain goods from the market. And Bholu identifies certain suppliers who can provide the goods as desired by Anmol, but the supplier is directly invoicing Anmol and Golu is out of the picture. So, in this case, will para 3 be triggered? No. Why? In this scenario, Bholu is only acting as a procurement agent. It's only acting as a facilitator and in no way is involved himself in the supply or receipt of goods. Therefore, Bholu is not an agent of Anmol for supply of goods in terms of para 3 of Schedule 1. So, you should always remember the golden rule. Here in para 3, it always follows the invoice. See who has been invoiced by whom. So in this case, Bholu was never invoiced. He is never in the picture. So he is just a facilitator in this scenario. He has not become an agent under GST. Then another scenario. Money Bank, a banking company, appoints Mandar, that is auctioneer, to auction certain goods. The auctioneer arranges for the auction and identifies the potential bidders. The highest bid is accepted and the goods are sold to the highest bidder by Money Bank. The invoice for the supply of goods is issued by Money Bank to the successful bidder. Is para 3 triggered here? Again, no. Why? Only providing auctioneering services here, the Mandar, that is the auctioneer, and is therefore not an agent under para 3 of Schedule 1 because the invoice for the supply is directly issued by the Money Bank to the customer, that is the successful bidder. The auctioneer is not coming in the invoicing chain. That's why it's just a facilitator. Let's see another example. Here, painter, that is the principal here, hires an exhibitor, that's an agent, and sends him his paintings for exhibition purposes. First is only for exhibition purpose. Here there is no sale. It's just that the exhibitor will display his paintings and people will come and watch it and they will go back. There is no sale happening. In this case, the painting sent without consideration is not a supply. Now there can be another situation for exhibition and sale. Here again there are two separate examples. Example 1. The exhibitor finds a buyer and the painter issues the invoice directly to the buyer. Again, like the money bank here. The GST impact: the exhibitor is providing only a service. Para 3 does not get triggered here. And any goods transferred from the painter to exhibitor will, even without consideration, will not be subject to GST. GST will only be charged on the supply between painter and the customer, not between the painter and the exhibitor. So again, second example. Here, painter principal hires the exhibitor and the exhibitor finds a buyer and issues the invoice in his own name to that customer who buys that painting. Here, whether Para 3 will be triggered? Yes, Para 3 will be triggered, and any supply of painting from the painter to the exhibitor will also be a taxable supply even if it is made without consideration. Next, we are diving into a topic that often confuses many GST practitioners, that is the treatment of a Del-Credre Agent or DCA. We'll specifically see how it fits under Para 3 of Schedule 1 of the CGST Act. This is important because government has issued specific clarifications on this subject. So let's start with the basic. What exactly is a Del-Credre Agent? In simple terms, a DCA is a special kind of selling agent. The main job is to find buyers for the principal's goods or services. However, what truly sets them apart from a normal agent is their guarantee. A DCA guarantees the payment to the principal. If the buyer fails to pay on time, the DCA steps in and pays the principal on behalf of the buyer. Because they take on this extra credit work, their commission is generally higher than a normal agent's commission. Now, the key question for us is, does a DCA fall under the ambit of an agent as per Para 3 of Schedule 1 of the CGST Act? The golden rule is always follow the invoice. The answer is a clear, it depends. See, the government clarification states that whether a DCA is considered an agent under Para 3 of Schedule 1 depends solely on who issues the invoice. Let's break it down into two clear scenarios. So it's exactly the same. We have to follow the basics. That is, always follow the invoice. So scenario 1, the invoice for the supply of goods is issued by the supplier, that is the principal, directly to the customers. So there is no agent coming in the invoicing flow. So this can be done by the principal himself or even through the DCA, as long as the invoice is in the principal's name. In this case, the DCA is merely acting as a facilitator. They are not involved in the transfer of title of the goods. Therefore, the DCA does not fall under the ambit of an agent under Para 3 of Schedule 1. Now let's take scenario 2. The invoice for the supply of goods is issued by DCA in his own name. If the DCA issues the invoice to the customer in his own name, they are effectively supplying the goods on behalf of the principal. They have the authority to pass the title of the goods. In this scenario, the DCA would fall under the ambit of an agent under Para 3 of Schedule 1. This means that any supply of goods between the principal and that DCA, even if it is made without consideration, would be deemed as a supply. Now here's another common question. A DCA often extends short-term loans to the buyers or pays the principal upfront and then recovers the amount with some interest from the buyer. The question is, does this interest form part of the value of the goods supplied? Again, the answer depends on whether the DCA is considered as an agent under Para 3 or not. Under scenario 1, where the DCA is not an agent, interest is a separate supply. In scenario 1, where DCA is not an agent, the temporary loan provided by DCA to the buyer is treated as a separate independent supply of service on a principal to principal basis. The interest charged is on this separate loan service. Therefore, the interest does not form part of the value of goods supplied by the principal to DCA. Now, let's take scenario 2, where DCA is an agent. Interest is part of goods value. In scenario 2, where the DCA is an agent as per para 3, then interest will also form part of the value of the overall goods supplied by the principal to the DCA and then DCA to the customer. The situation is very different here. Here the supply chain is principal, the goods, there is invoicing between principal to DCA and then from DCA to the customer. So the credit extended by the DCA to the buyer is not seen as an independent service. Instead, it is subsumed in the supply of goods made by the DCA to the customer. Consequently, under section 15(2)(d) of the CGST Act, we will also discuss this separately while we'll do valuation. Any interest or late fee charged for delayed payment is included in the transaction value. This means that the interest charged by DCA must be included in the value of the goods, and GST will be applicable on the total amount including that interest value. And this only happens when DCA is an agent under para 3 of schedule 1. Now to wrap up, para 3 of schedule 1 applies only to goods. First thing to remember, it does not apply to supply of services between the principal and agent, and it will be covered under other provisions. And second most important point is always follow the invoice. Always check who is issuing the invoice and to whom. If an agent issues the invoice in his own name, he is stepping into the shoes of the supplier for GST purposes, and para 3 will be triggered. So if you found this breakdown useful, please like, share and subscribe. Let us know in the comments if you have any questions. Thanks for watching.